Thank you everyone for being here. Please feel free to chime in with questions as we go or at the end if anyone has anything they want to ask. So as Lorraine said, I'm Kristin. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I have lots of experience with feeding a picky eater because I have a 2-year-old, and I've been working with the WIC program for several years, the Women, Infants, and Children program. So I have had lots of training and experience in working with feeding little ones. So it can be a joy, it can be a challenge, it can be all sorts of things. But I love this topic. It's such a good one. You might be interested in this information because you have a picky eater in your family, or maybe even you yourself as an adult are something of a picky eater, and just interested in some of the strategies and techniques we can use to approach this. Of course, this is not medical advice. Always talk to your doctor before starting any diet or food plan. All right, so does this sound familiar? Are meal times with your child a struggle? Is it a fight? Are you like trying to convince your kid to eat? Are they resisting really hard? You just kind of worried about them? Like maybe they're not eating enough, not enough healthy food? Are you worried about their weight and their growth? Is your kiddo refusing lots of different foods? Maybe they only have a couple of foods that are kind of their safe go-to foods, and everything else really upsets them to see that on their plates. Maybe you're a picky eater, as we mentioned. So if any of this sounds familiar, stay tuned. We're going to cover all of these things and more, specifically why someone might not accept a variety of foods. We're going to talk about something called the division of responsibility. We're going to talk foundations for healthy and happy eating, and of course, lots of tips for feeding picky eaters. Okay, so why won't your child eat more than a few foods, or why are they eating way less than they used to? So kids are often a lot more sensitive than adults are to smell, to taste, and especially to texture. Some children might have sensory or texture issues. Some adults might have this too. This sometimes is accompanied by other health conditions or sometimes things like autism. They might have a absolutely different experience eating a food than other people do. And so, it's a good idea to recognize these differences and respect them. It's important to understand where these kids are coming from. There's so many reasons why they may be eating less or eating a more limited variety of foods. Sometimes they're copying parent behavior or siblings or their friends. Maybe they're just asserting some independence. Maybe they're growing up a little bit, whether they're in that toddler stage or getting into that like preteen and teen stage. This kind of goes for kids of various stages throughout development, but they might just not be interested in eating what they used to. Sometimes food has been used as something of a bribe or a punishment or a reward, and kids tend to push back to that a little bit too sometimes. And sometimes maybe kids are eating less just because this is a normal part of child development. Growth will speed up and slow down at different times of children's development, and appetite will often match that. So, especially like in those toddler years, you might notice your kid is eating way less than they used to. They used to eat everything you gave them when they were 1, maybe 2 years old. And then they start getting into the 2.5, 3, 4 age, and they are way less interested in food. All of a sudden, they want to eat just a few things. This is actually pretty typical, pretty normal, and not such a terrible thing. Often there will be growth spurts that might lead to increased eating over time. So keep an eye on your child's patterns over a long period of time, over the weeks, over the months, over the years. are they, over the long time span, getting a variety of foods, eating overall enough to support their growth? And how do you know if that's happening? Well, always check in with the pediatrician. They're the ones that are going to be able to give you a nice objective opinion on, what your child's growth is really looking like. They're going to assess over the years their weight, their height, and they're going to plot it all on a growth chart. So this is something that you can keep track of at home. Ask your doctor to print it out for you, access it on their, online system, however your pediatrician does things. But looking at your child's growth chart is a great way to keep track of how they're growing. So consistency is really important when we're talking about growth. Kids come in all shapes and sizes, as we know. Genetics will determine a lot of things, especially height. Weight is determined by so many factors as well. Obviously, food, activity, lifestyle in general, what they're drinking, so many things go into it. So what we're really looking at here is not that they're in a specific percentile. You don't need your child to necessarily be right in the middle 50th percentile or necessarily any higher or lower. What we're looking for is that their growth has always been stable for them. So if they've kind of always been around the 30th percentile or the 70th, or somewhere in the higher or lower ranges even, that's usually a pretty good sign. We're looking for consistency. We don't want any sudden drops or stalls in growth or development or any rapid changes. Sometimes height will suddenly jump up a few inches and then their weight will catch up. So that's why we're looking at more of a bigger time frame. If we are talking about, is a child underweight or overweight, talk to the doctor, see what they say about it. Say, what do you think about my child's weight and their growth? Do you feel like they're, growing at a healthy rate? If the doctor's not really concerned about it, that's usually a pretty good sign that they're growing well. Keep in mind any medical concerns, of course, any food sensitivities, food allergies, dietary restrictions. Obviously, you're going to adhere to, any things that your child shouldn't eat for health reasons. But what we're looking for is, overall that long-term consistency of growth. Your child's BMI can be a helpful tool to look at. BMI compares their weight for their height, and these growth charts will look at those things, and they'll also compare it to other children of their age. So that can be a helpful way of just sort of saying, like, where do they fall on this spectrum compared to other children their age? It's not the only way of assessing a child's growth and health, but it's one tool. So if they are, below the 5th percentile, that is considered underweight. If they're above the 95th percentile, that's considered obese. That doesn't mean that you have done anything wrong if they are falling into that category. It's often just where that child's weight and growth has naturally rested, and anywhere in between. So talk to the doctor, see what they have to say, and just remember, consistency is what we're looking for, and then of course kids are going to come in all shapes and sizes. Okay, but what are we here to talk about? Really, we want to know, how do we get kids to try some new foods, or to go back to foods that they once loved that all of a sudden they don't want anything to do with? So frustrating when that happens, right? So how do we do that? One of my favorite resources, and I've got a lot of resources for you listed in this presentation, is the books and articles written by Ellen Satter. She is a registered dietitian who is kind of known as the guru of feeding children. She's written a lot of really great books. One of my favorite ones is How to Get Your Child to Eat But Not Too Much. And she's written a lot of other wonderful books kind of along those same lines. She has this concept called the division of responsibility, and it's been adopted by a lot of organizations and professionals since she came up with it. I think in the 90s. It's been around for a little while. The division of responsibility breaks it down into what mom and dad or the caregiver is responsible for versus what the child is responsible for. So if you are, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and saying, like, I have to get this kid to eat, this is my job as a parent, actually, Ellen takes a little bit of that stress off of you and a little bit of that burden off of you and says, you know what, you really can't force your child to eat. You really can't control every bite that goes into their mouth. What you can control is what you're going to offer the child, when you're going to offer foods, and where. And so specifically, here are the options we're having for food. We're having meals 3 times a day, and we're having 2 snacks, and we're eating at the dinner table. And then the child is the one who's actually going to be responsible for how much they eat and whether or not they eat anything at all. Sounds a little bit unnerving, maybe, to just sort of release that responsibility to the child, but hear me out. I definitely recommend reading some of the resources by Ellen Satter. Here's a link to her website, ellensatterinstitute.org. Lots of free stuff on there, or you can check out one of her books. And we'll go into this in a little more detail. So the parent or the caregiver's job with feeding is to choose and prepare the food. So you want to offer a nice variety of healthy foods for your child. They can't eat healthy foods if they aren't regularly offered healthy foods. So it's your job to offer them. A really great thing for kids is to have consistency. So, kids thrive on routine, right? They like to have that to depend on. So providing regular meals and snacks at approximately the same time every day is going to be great for kids because they know they can depend on that next meal or snack. It's your job as the caregiver to make eating times pleasant. So, instead of meal times being filled with coaxing the child to eat or being really worried about them eating, actually it can be really helpful, kind of difficult when you are worried about your kid, but really helpful to just try to relax and make the meal time enjoyable. Make it happy family time, or, time to just talk and catch up, maybe tell jokes, be a little silly, where your kids feel some of the pressure lifted off of them. They just feel like the dinner table is a safe space where they can exist without necessarily too much pressure from anyone on what they're going to do with their food. And it may be a little counterintuitive, but that can actually help them kind of relax a little bit to maybe try some new foods. And then it's also the caregiver's job to step by step show the child by example how to behave at the family dinner table or breakfast table or lunch table, whatever meal it may be. But role modeling, here's how we use our utensils, use our napkin, say please and thank you, pass things nicely. It's an important part of learning how to eat and, being a part of the family dinner table. The parents are also going to be responsible for being considerate of their child's lack of experience with food. Okay, so it's important to not necessarily cater to their likes and dislikes. Definitely don't recommend being a short order cook. So don't recommend making a separate meal for your child who wants something else. But, be respectful of the fact that they don't like a lot of foods. You know that, and that's okay. But a good way to kind of respect that while still giving them some options to try some new things is have at least 1 or 2 things on the table that you know that they do like, and then maybe 1 or 2 other things that are kind of iffy maybe foods for them. So at least they're going to have something in their tummy, but they also are going to have this opportunity to try some new things, to see you eat it, and to just be exposed to these new foods. It's really important that your children are hungry when they sit down to eat. So in between meals and snacks, and as I said before, I recommend generally 3 meals and 1 or 2 snacks a day for kids. So plenty of opportunities to eat during the day. So in between meals, it's a good idea not to let them snack or graze or get full on juice or milk. They, of course, should have, beverages with their meals, like juice or milk, but the water should be the primary beverage in between meals so that they're not, accidentally getting full off of juice or milk and not having an appetite when they go to sit down for meal times. If they're hungry, they're a lot more likely to try the foods that are offered to them. And the one of the last tips here is it's your responsibility to let your child grow into the body that's right for him. So again, this can be really hard. We as parents want to take care of our kids and make sure that they're thriving and healthy and eating well and growing well. And, this is something that we can't really directly control. But what we're talking about here are the things that we can control. Offering the healthy choices, being a good role model, making sure they have regular meal times and they're actually hungry when they go to sit down, and then, allowing them to grow into the body that they are, naturally going to grow into. So that's the parent side of things. And now let's talk a little bit about the child's side of things. And really, since we're talking about this from the parent perspective, this is sort of the parent or the caregiver's job to trust your child to eat the amount that they need, to trust them to learn to eat the foods that you eat. Eventually, they most likely will, given the chance. To trust them to grow predictably in the way that's right for them. Again, like we said, a lot of that's determined by genetics and things that are not necessarily in our control. And then to trust your child to learn to behave well at mealtime. So a lot of this is not stuff that's going to be happening immediately. A lot of this is, learning and growing and things that are going to happen over time. But with consistency, um, it's absolutely possible for these things to develop. So as we said, the parent and the caregiver are responsible for the what, the when, and the where you're going to eat. And the child is responsible for how much and not to eat at all. So, this can be a challenge to say, like, I'm gonna just let my kid decide completely what to eat and not necessarily try to intervene. And that's not to say you can't, be a great role model and let them see you eating all the foods and talking about how delicious they are and how much you love eating these foods. And maybe you give a little, subtle encouragement. The kids are super perceptive to being kind of coaxed in one way or the other, and often they will resist and kind of push back. It's sort of that nature of that independence that starts to develop at various stages of development. So often this kind of more positive, trusting approach can actually be really helpful in allowing kids to feel more independent and like they are making their decisions about food, and they may be a lot more willing and happy about trying new things if they're feeling more comfortable and relaxed at the dinner table. So this is all coming from Ellen Satter's website. Really great resource. That resource is right up top here, and they'll all be listed at the end as well. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the foundations to a healthy, happy eater. This comes from a really great resource, another registered dietitian colleague from Chow Down Nutrition. And she put together this great visual, which in the next few slides, I have it magnified a little bit so you'll be able to see it better. But this pyramid sort of visual is a nice way of sort of elaborating on, what it takes to sort of build a healthy relationship with food with kids. So let's start at the bottom. The first thing is to remove any harm that a child may associate with food. So maybe there's a lot of pressure or maybe a little bribery going on. If you do this, you get a cookie, or if you eat your broccoli, you get dessert, or using food as a reward. That kind of thing. It can be helpful in the short term, it can often work, but sometimes it can just, like we were saying, put a little too much pressure on the food. And it can also sort of create these associations with food. So when you are sort of withholding dessert unless something else happens, you're putting a lot of value on dessert. And it teaches the child that, well, dessert's the best thing out there, and I just got to do what I got to do to get to it. And this broccoli must not be very good if they have to convince me to eat it and I have to get through it to get to the cookie or whatever it is. So sort of, taking any negative associations off of food can be helpful in just sort of being neutral about different foods. Um, some parents even go so far as to serve dessert with the meal and allow their child to just, go between one food and the other and, eat what is the right amount for them. The next step above removing harm is building trust. So if your child says they just aren't going to eat it, they don't like it, they don't want it, it's our job as parents, as difficult as it is, to accept that. Accept their refusal, trust in their appetite, and allow them to pay attention to their inner hunger fullness cues. This is actually a really important thing in lifelong healthy development of understanding our hunger and fullness and having a healthy relationship with food. Often we have that kind of clean plate syndrome where, maybe your parents said as a child, you have to clear your plate before you leave the table. And I mean, yes, we don't want to waste food, absolutely. So, there is that to consider. But also that is sort of disregarding, a person's inner hunger and fullness cues. You're kind of asking your child to ignore their fullness and push past that point. Maybe they truly are not hungry. Maybe they don't feel good. Maybe this food just really doesn't make them feel good. It makes them feel sick. And so just respecting that and accepting their refusal is actually going to build a lot of trust. Your child is going to say, like, I know that, my parent is going to allow me to eat or not eat whatever foods I feel comfortable with. And that's going to help them feel a lot more relaxed and likely to experiment with foods in the future. And so a step above building trust is routine. As we were talking about, regular schedule is so helpful for kids, especially little ones. It allows them to get hungry in between meals, and it allows them to rely on predictable meal times. So when they know when the next meal is coming and maybe they're kind of like whining and wanting a snack in between meals, you can say, well, we're going to eat in 30 minutes. So you're going to be really hungry by then. And why don't you help me, start getting the meal ready? Or maybe like, I have your fruit ready. So you can start, munching on that while I get everything else ready. But allowing that hunger to build up in between meals is so important because they're a lot more likely to try some food if they're actually hungry when they sit down to eat. And so moving further up the pyramid, planning is super important because here's where the parent or the caregiver comes in. They're deciding the what and the when and the where of offering the food. Having a family meal plan can make your life so much easier if you're not already planning in advance what you're going to eat. This can be really helpful. It doesn't have to be down to every last detail or every last meal, but some people like to put a whiteboard or a chalkboard or something on the refrigerator and just fill it in each week with, what are we going to have for dinner? Plan for, maybe this night we're going to take it easy and get a pizza, and this night we're going to make tacos, and this night, the kids are going to help me make spaghetti or whatever it is. Then you kind of have a plan for a couple of nights of leftovers so that you're not, going crazy cooking constantly. But sort of having that in mind so that you can grocery shop based on your plan and be prepared to make those foods. Next comes family meals. So as we said, pleasant, happy, relaxed family meals that are not just focused on your child's eating, right? So they're not feeling maybe uncomfortable because everybody's watching them and really observant of what they're eating. but instead they're part of the group. They're part of the family where everybody is just sort of enjoying everyone's company, talking about their day, and the pressure and the attention is not solely on, what the child is eating. And then up at the top is skills. So we're helping our kids build skill development. We're helping them expand what foods they'll eat, different textures, different tastes, variety, and we're creating that positive environment for them to expand their palate and try these new things. So I have some visuals, some examples of balanced meals. So we are kind of more focused on like toddler, preschool age, but of course, expand the portion size, and these meals are good for all ages. So these pictures come from Chow Down Nutrition, and there's so many great social media accounts you can follow, this being one of them, where there's so many beautiful examples of meals for kids. It can be good inspiration. But a nice balanced plate, and I really like these plates with the dividers because it can sort of help you, break it up into different food groups. You're gonna have a protein in there, you're gonna have a veggie and something starchy, usually. That's kind of your basic meal breakdown. So in this case, you've got chicken, yams, which are your starchy vegetable, and some green beans. You have color, you have greens and oranges, you have protein. Pretty nice balanced meal. And everything is toddler and preschool friendly sizes and textures, not any choking hazards, nothing too hard or big. Kids can pick this stuff up with their hands or use their utensils. So I was saying, not being a short order cook, having everyone eat the same meal can be a really important part of planning your meals because, okay, we don't have time to be making, 2, 3 different meals every time everyone sits down to eat. And also, this is where your children learn to try different things. So even if they're not going to eat everything that mom and dad are eating or whoever else is at the table, it's a great idea to offer them small portions, a little bit of anything you're eating. So in this case, okay, we're having homemade burgers. So much easier for a toddler to have this kind of deconstructed. Now a preschooler and up, they can probably, handle the burger as it should be eaten stacked. But in this case, you've got protein from your burger patty, some veggies from the toppings, a little bit of dairy with the cheese, and you might even throw the bun in there somewhere if they want the bread. But this is a good way for them to sort of explore and try some different things. They might just pick at the lettuce and tomato. It turned out that they love it. You don't know until you try. And something we'll talk about later is sometimes it takes a kid 10, 12, 15 exposures to a food before they even come to accept it. Sometimes they might not even want it on their plate at first. And then when you say, well, you don't have to eat it, it's just there. You just eat what you want. Then they might kind of relax. And the next few times it shows up on their plate, they're okay with it. They're not so upset. And you're like, well, you still don't have to eat it, but it's there. You can try it if you want it. And then they're kind of more relaxed around it. And then maybe they're starting to like pick it up and play with it a little bit. Maybe they're smelling it. Maybe they're putting it in their mouth, but then taking it back out again. There's kind of a lot of steps to, accepting a new food for some kids. Some kids are just going to go right for it, right, and start eating right away. But others, it's going to take some time and some patience. But here's where the consistency comes in. Here's another little example of a meal where you've got a homemade salmon cake and some sweet potato fries and some veggies. And again, maybe they aren't going to eat those veggies, but they have the opportunity to. Maybe they're just going to play with it a little bit, but they're getting used to it. They're being exposed to it. Maybe they'll have a few bites. If not, it's not a lot of waste. You just gave them a tiny little portion to start with. So there's not a lot of pressure for them to use that food up. Maybe you're splurging on a little steak this night and you're gonna share some nice thin sliced, soft kind of The best way to serve a child meat is very kind of soft and falling apart, nothing too tough. You don't want any choking hazards. But maybe they're going to have their protein in the form of steak in this meal. They'll have some green beans, and there's their starchy vegetable in the form of the yams. And maybe you're just going super simple and it's peanut butter and jelly with a side of fruit and a little bit of veggies. And notice again how small these portion sizes are. It's just two little broccoli florets. It doesn't need to be a ton, one or two little pieces can be a lot less intimidating to a child than a big heaping portion. So maybe for this meal, they're going to eat the peanut butter and jelly. Maybe they haven't tried mango before, but maybe they might give it a go. And they're kind of iffy about broccoli. They may or may not eat it, but they're given the opportunity here. Okay, so how do you get your kid doing what this kid's doing? Just diving into the broccoli face first. So as we were saying, multiple exposures is so important. And this is coming from Food Explorers. I love this website. They have so many good resources for feeding kids in a really healthy and positive way. But introducing these new foods, it's challenging and it can be kind of frustrating, right? Especially if they're just rejecting it over and over again, or even getting upset when these foods are winding up on their plate. As we said, it can take multiple exposures, 10, 15 times sometimes, for a child to accept it. Often the best tactic is to just try to be cool, don't make too big a deal out of it. If they do eat it, yeah, give them some praise, make sure they know that you're proud of them. But don't make a huge deal out of it either way, and that really keeps the pressure off of them. Practice what you preach, of course, right? So you got to be a good role model for your kid. If they see you avoiding the veggies, they're going to be a lot more likely to do the same. If you don't really like veggies yourself, maybe it's a good time to experiment with cooking them in different ways. So raw veggies versus steamed versus sauteed versus boiled versus roasted, all very different experiences. And also the quality of the vegetable. So are you getting it like fresh and bursting with flavor from the local farmer's market? Or is it like not such a great, piece of fruit or vegetable that you got at the grocery store that was kind of on its last legs? So, kids really respond to, good quality food. They can tell when something is um, great, or when it's maybe not the best quality. And that might not always be possible. We're going to be coming into wintertime soon. The farmers markets aren't, going year round. That's just the nature of food production. But of course we have, frozen products that often are going to be really good quality still. Um, and various things like that. Even canned foods can be okay at times, as long as you're watching the added salts and sugars. So, experiment with different ways of cooking vegetables. Roasted is the best way, hands down. If you ask me, I love a roasted veggie, whether it's broccoli, sweet potatoes, beets. Really, you can roast just about any vegetable, and it does something to the texture where it just makes it kind of crispy but soft in the middle, and it really unleashes just all the flavors. It can be slightly sweet. So that's a great way to cook vegetables. Uh, the third tip is you get what you get. So, this is the don't go ahead and make them something else situation, because then they'll kind of learn, well, if I refuse to eat this, mom will just make me grilled cheese or whatever it is in place of it. As we said, they're a lot more likely to try things when they're hungry and they know that this is their opportunity to eat and this is what they're getting. And, like we said, we don't want them leaving the table hungry or, super upset. So making sure there's at least one or two things on the plate that that they're going to like can help with that. 4 is try not to sneak around too much when it comes to food. So, you may be able to get away with hiding some veggies in some of their foods. And there's some pretty good recipes for, putting, carrots and zucchini in muffins, for example, or, blending veggies into sauces and soups. And that's fine. It probably will increase the nutrition and taste for the whole family. But if you're trying to just sort of sneak the fruits and veggies into their food without them knowing in ways that they might figure it out, they're probably going to be pretty mad about that and then maybe be less likely to try it in the future. So trying to be pretty upfront with your kids is the best way to actually, help them long term learn to accept these foods. And we kind of talked about drinks, so not letting them fill up too much on drinks with sugar, even if it's natural sugar like juice. So a good rule of thumb is for juice, maybe 4 ounces a day, if that. It's always better to eat the real fruit than to drink the juice because the fruit has the fiber, it has the whole package of all the nutrients. Whereas the juice is basically just the concentrated sugary part, which, is fine in moderation, but in excess, it can, cause a child to fill up and it can definitely lead to, dental caries and other problems like that. And I always like to caution, be careful with things like Pediasure or other beverages that are, marketed towards kids to help them if they're picky eaters or not eating enough. Obviously, if the pediatrician recommends that kind of thing, of course, follow the medical advice. But in general, those Pediasures and other things like that, they can be fine once in a while for, a quick on-the-go meal replacement. But I wouldn't rely on them for sort of supplementing calories in your child's diet because it doesn't really help their appetite. They're kind of filling up on that and then they're still not hungry at meal times. So there can be a time and a place for those for sure, but I would say approach those with caution. So it can be a good idea to kind of lower your expectations in some ways, right? Like it's normal, as we said, for a child's appetite to decrease at different stages of growth. So, they are growing exponentially and so rapidly as newborns and as infants. But then they get into the toddler stage, between like 2 and 5 years old, and their growth, it slows down a lot. And so it can be kind of worrisome to parents when they see their kid who used to just gobble down the food is all of a sudden a lot less interested in it. But usually this is pretty normal and to be expected. Their growth is slowing down, even though they're still growing. It's just not at the exponential rate that it was when they were tiny. So naturally they're going to need, a little less food. Their appetite is going to be less. As we were saying, they might go through growth spurts. So you might see the appetite kind of come and go. You might notice they all of a sudden have this ravenous appetite and they want to eat really well for a few weeks. And then all of a sudden they've grown a couple of inches and then maybe it just kind of, goes back to not wanting to eat so much. All part of the normal growing process. So it can be helpful to sort of just go with the flow when it comes to that. 7 is stick to the routine. Like we said, kids are just thriving on that routine. They really, need those regular meals to depend on, and the snacks. The snacks kind of strategically placed midway in between meals can be really helpful. Whatever works best for your family. Maybe there's a mid-morning snack and a mid-afternoon snack, especially that like after nap snack if your kid is still taking a nap, can be a good time to get them a little something. Snacks are a great opportunity to include a fruit or a vegetable. I'm a big fan of the two-part snacks, so at least two things. Maybe they have a piece of fruit and some crackers or something, so that they get a little bit of variety, and those foods can kind of balance each other out, and they'll most likely be into at least, one of those things. Try to avoid the bribes and threats. As we said, it can be pretty helpful in the short term, but long term, you're sort of giving them the message that the food isn't great if they have to be bribed to eat it. So we're trying to, create this positive association with foods. 9 is the division of responsibility, as we've been talking about. So, remember, you as the caregiver, it's your job to offer the foods, but really, ultimately, it's your child's decision what to eat. We can't be responsible for what they're actually chewing and swallowing, right? Like that, they really are becoming more and more independent as they grow, and that is their decision to decide what to eat. But you as the parent and the caregiver can decide, we're going to offer nutritious food regularly that is age appropriate, and trust in your child to decide what and how much to eat. And then 10 is minimizing distractions. So that TV, the screens, they're everywhere. It's hard to avoid them. My family's definitely guilty of it at times. But eating in front of the TV, it distracts kids. And so they're not necessarily paying attention to what they're eating. They're not looking at mom and dad and their siblings to learn, the social cues and the norms of, how to, use your fork and how to pass the food and how to, properly, they really look up to their parents and their caregivers as their role models for everything. And, when they're little, especially as they age, they really are looking to us to be role models. So, minimizing those distractions so they can be more present, and also so they can pay more attention to their hunger and fullness cues. And that goes for us adults too. It can be hard not to eat in front of the TV sometimes, but it can really distract you from, when you're getting full. You may accidentally realize, whoops, I went a little too far, ate a little too much, after you stop eating, but kind of tuning into yourself and the moments and your hunger and fullness cues can be very helpful for both adults and kids. Okay, so just a couple of other bonus tips. Potentially getting your kids involved in the meal process can be helpful. Now, some kids are just not interested in this at all. Some may be intrigued with helping and playing in the kitchen. So the earlier you start, the easier this is going to be to have them sort of used to it and interested. And you might start small with saying like, do you want to help me mix this? Do you want to, pour the milk into the mixing bowl and help me make the pancakes or whatever you're making? But getting them into the kitchen and part of making the foods can go a long way and have them more interested in actually trying the food when it's ready. Um, as we were saying, try to offer new foods when they're pretty hungry. They're a lot more likely to try them. Incorporate new foods into old favorites. So maybe that they love lasagna, and then maybe you're deciding like, hey, tonight we're going to chop up some zucchini and we're going to put it in the lasagna. Do you want to help me? I chopped up the zucchini. Do you want to help me pour it into the pan? So they can help you do that so they know it's coming. So it's not like a surprise or like a bad shock when all of a sudden there's something new and an old favorite. So, kind of being upfront with them and telling them that it's coming, helping them be involved in the process can be helpful. And then just continuing to expose kids to new foods in different ways. So maybe they just were not into the raw carrot sticks. So maybe next time you're going to try it roasted, and then maybe next time you're going to try some boiled, and just try it in different ways. Those food cutters can be fun. They make a lot of them, it's essentially like a cookie cutter, but for different fruits and veggies and things. So you can use them to cut their sandwich into the shape of a star, or, different things like that. Um, Cutting the veggies into different shapes and sizes. It just makes it a little more fun and colorful. And if they have, a beautiful plate, it will make them, maybe a little more interested in trying different things. And, just some reminders, you're the role model. So, try those foods and watch what you say and do around foods. They really are picking up on so many things, especially as they grow. They see your behavior around food. And if you're kind of having a negative reaction to something, they're probably going to be, approaching that food with caution. It doesn't mean you have to like every food out there to offer it to your child. You can still offer, you never know, they might love something that you don't like. So, taking this opportunity to maybe revisit some things, cook them in different ways, like we were saying, try some things again. Um, you don't have to like every single food to still be a good role model to your kid and offer things to them as well. Be patient, like we said, be consistent, keep offering foods with limited pressure, but lots of positive encouragement. And then remember, you're providing that food and that timing and the space, and then just allowing kids to choose what they want and how much they're going to eat. And then some tips for the kitchen, like the cooking skills are kind of disappearing in the younger generations, right? Like, kids are graduating college and they don't really know how to cook anything for themselves often. And somewhere along the way, they just like didn't quite learn it. So the earlier you can start teaching them some cooking skills, the better. Maybe you yourself don't feel super comfortable in the kitchen. So this might be a good time to, learn some things together. There's so many resources out there. Of course, cookbooks, especially ones geared toward kids and families, can have some pretty, simple and straightforward recipes that, you can get your kids involved with. And, when in doubt, there's plenty of, follow along cooking shows and YouTube videos and things where you can, have step-by-step directions on how to prepare something. So it's an awesome time to learn a new skill because there's so many resources out there. But the research has shown that, the earlier you get the kids involved in the kitchen and the more often, then it often does lead to having a better relationship with food later on. So it's going to make them a little more adventurous and curious and open to trying new things. And, even if they don't necessarily immediately go to try the food that you just prepared together, that's okay. Like we said, the consistency and the repeated exposures over time will most likely eventually lead to them trying it and, hopefully liking it. It doesn't mean they're going to wind up liking everything by any means. All kids are going to have their own preferences, some much stronger than others, and that's okay. We're going to respect that. But at least we're going to do what we can from our part to, just ensure that they've had the opportunity to try these foods. And just remember, there's going to be lots of messes, whether they're cooking in the kitchen or they're learning to feed themselves or they're kind of playing with their food, like maybe somewhere in the middle stages of getting ready to accept a food where they're just sort of playing with it, maybe mashing it up a bit. Maybe they're still in the throwing food stage if they're pretty little. It's kind of part of the process, so expect the messes. Don't worry about them too much. And, see if you can get the kids to help you clean them up. Good luck with that. There's all sorts of resources that I mentioned along the way. The Food Explorers and especially the Ellen Satter websites are some of my favorites. So these are some really great resources that I recommend. And if you need additional help, maybe your child is having, particular sensory issues or, food allergies, or you're just looking for a little more of a deep dive into this topic or anything else related to food, registered dietitian nutritionists such as myself, most of us accept insurance, and your insurance may cover depending on what's going on. So you can receive a personalized plan and a lot of extra information and one-on-one counseling. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much, Lorraine.